Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publicists Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, we are going to take a fun look at historically Black phrases, a new book by two journalists and podcasters who will probably make you laugh. First, some headlines. Hunter Biden has been indicted by a special prosecutor, a special counsel, a holdover from the Trump administration. We'll tell you about that. Also, Kevin McCarthy, House Speaker, is showing some backbone. Really, he's daring the MAGA Republican wing of the of Congress to oust him. We'll have some details. And the California Black Caucus. Remember the big to-do about reparations in California and the Reparations Task Force and all of that? Well, the California Black Caucus has launched a statewide campaign to inform residents about the work done by the task force and why they say Black residents deserve monetary payments in any reparations deal. And get this, Beyoncé and Taylor Swift are on. They've been on this huge, huge tour, breaking all types of records, going neck and neck. Uh, well, Gannett, yeah, the newspaper organization that owns USA Today, has put out a unique job offer to Beyoncé fans and to Taylor Swift fans. They're offering them a job to write about Beyoncé and Taylor Swift only, not just their concerts, but everything else about them. And the pay will shock you and probably will have a lot of people running to Gannett to try and get that job. We'll tell you more about why that's so controversial. And this morning, a note in history. September 15th, 1963, Reverend John H. Cross Jr. and members of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, were preparing to start the Youth Day worship when a bomb went off. We will bring you a little tidbit in history on that. First, Hunter Biden. Federal prosecutors have indicted him. He is the son, of course, of President Joe Biden. They indicted him on gun charges, marking the first time that a child of a sitting president has faced a criminal indictment. Hunter was indicted yesterday in Delaware federal court on 3 counts tied to the possession of a gun while using narcotics. 2 counts are tied to Biden's allegedly completing a form indicating he was not using illegal drugs when he purchased a Colt Cobra revolver in October of 2018. The third count alleges that he possessed a firearm while using a narcotic. The indictment says Biden certified on a federally mandated form that he was not an unlawful user of and addicted to any stimulant, narcotic drug, and any other controlled substance, when in fact, as he knew, that statement was false and fictitious. Fictitious. Two of the counts carry a maximum prison sentence of 10 years, while the third has a maximum of 5 years. Each count also carries a maximum fine of $250,000. The historic indictment against the son of a sitting president comes after a plea deal that might have ended a years-long probe into Hunter Biden fell apart. It fell apart in court as they were, if you recall, as they were presenting the deal to the judge. And the judge said, wait a minute. And it's so interesting because prosecutors in this case have been getting threats. It underscores the political atmosphere of this country. Been getting reported getting lots and lots of threats from people who say they're going too light on the president's son and that he better be thrown under the jail. Yet, we suspect those same folks are the ones who are threatening Fonnie Willis and Alvin Bragg and the special prosecutor Jack Smith over the Trump indictments. And Power 96 says, I bet those charges end up in a plea deal. Well, they had a plea deal. And this is what Hunter Biden's lawyers are arguing, that we had an ironclad deal. Apparently, it wasn't so ironclad. Clearly politically motivated here, but hey, old Beretta said, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Kevin McCarthy showing some backbone, lashing out at the Marjorie Taylor Greens and Matt Gaetz of the world. Frustration did boil over, in fact, in a closed-door House Republican meeting yesterday when McCarthy all but dared his detractors to file the motion to vacate, he said. He says, if you want to file a motion to vacate, then bleep and file the motion. I am tired of this. Really? And he was directing that tirade specifically at Gaetz, the Republican out of Florida, and others who are threatening to force him out of the speakership if he doesn't comply with their demands, like putting certain bills on the floor and not passing a stopgap bill to prevent a government shutdown at the end of the month. They want this shutdown more than anything. Trump has ordered them, his wing, to shut it down. And so here we are. Just like the impeachment inquiry, Trump ordered that, and here we are. Under current House rules, any one member, this happened because McCarthy had no backbone. this rule that they instituted after McCarthy went 15 rounds to win the speakership. But under these new rules, which applies to this caucus only during this Congress, any one member can force a vote to vacate the speaker's chair, but it would take a majority of the chamber to remove him. So, of course, there's a narrow majority in the Republicans, I should say, enjoy a narrow majority with only 4 defections to spare before needing Democratic help to pass legislation. So if all the Democrats voted to remove him, just a handful of rebels could kick McCarthy out of the speakership. McCarthy later admitted to a group of reporters, he says, I showed frustration in here because I am frustrated with the Republican conference, frustrated with some people in the conference, he said. He cited the holdup over passing defense appropriations legislation, which was supposed to pass this week, has been stalled, even though there are no specific Republican complaints about that bill. The lawmakers on Thursday, yesterday, of course, and acknowledged that the entire appropriations process is held up because some of the conservative, read MAGA, right-wing, far right-wing Republicans are issuing more demands before the rest of the appropriations process can proceed. Boy, oh boy, it is so interesting. Power 96 says the Republicans are definitely giving Benny Hill vibes, and Austin is watching this morning. He says Kevin McCarthy has chicken bone, not backbone. Like that, Austin. Well, you remember all the talk about the reparations in California and how far they got, and the Reparations Task Force made their recommendations in June, presented to the lawmakers in California late June, early July, and this whole momentum was built. And then they handed the report over, and the report talked about everything, found that everything wrong and how they should fix it, including monetary damages, reparations, but it did not have a dollar figure on that. So the California Congressional Black Caucus is now going on a statewide campaign to educate California citizens on the critical nature of reparations for Black people, including cash payments for the harms of slavery. This comes on the heels of a University of California, Berkeley poll released this week that shows most California residents oppose, of course, Black residents receiving any financial compensation as part of reparations uh, from the state assembly. Among all of those who responded, 59% rejected the idea of cash payments to Black descendants of slavery in the state. Meanwhile, 76% of Black respondents were in favor of cash payments, and 66% of white voters were opposed to Black Californians receiving money. Democrats in the poll were more likely to support cash reparations than Republicans and those with no party affiliation who strongly oppose. Reginald Jones Sawyer, who's a member of the Reparations Task Force, said the results show a lack of knowledge around California's deep involvement in slavery and other forms of racism that devastated Black families. To inform the public, Jones Sawyer said the California Black Caucus will begin a fundraising campaign to hire a firm to disseminate clear and concise and direct messaging about the report. He says, obviously, most people don't read the didn't read the preliminary or final report by the task force. People now are trying to debunk those findings. Another hurdle, of course, would be educating members of the California Assembly. They are expected to sponsor legislation based on the task force 1,000-page report that was published, as we said earlier this year in late June. The report covered a myriad of areas and recommended more than 100 statewide policies to address generations of discrimination and racial disparities. It did not, as we said earlier, propose a dollar amount owed to people who are quote, able to demonstrate that they are the descendants of either an enslaved African American in the United States or a free African American living in the United States before 1900. That's a quite the conversation to have, right? Quite the conversation. We know what ultimately is the deal there. So um, just can't expect anything else, can we? And of course, now to the 60th anniversary of that tragic event of September 15th, 1963. Reverend John H. Cross Jr. and members of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham were preparing to start the Youth Day worship that day when a bomb went off. And um, he says, Barbara Cross said, I will never forget that horrific noise. She's the oldest daughter of that preacher. She says, I remember everything got real dark and you could hear kids screaming. At 10:22 a.m., a massive explosion sent glass, cement, and debris flying. An FBI investigation later discovered that four Ku Klux Klan members had planted dynamite under a cement staircase outside of the church. The blast knocked down power lines and blew a hole in the side of the building, completely destroying the ladies' bathroom in the basement where a group of girls had been getting ready for church. Four little girls. You might remember the movie. Spike Lee did the movie on the four little girls. They were killed in the church that morning. 11-year-old Denise McNair, along with 14-year-old Cynthia Wesley Carol Robertson, and Addie Mae Collins. Nearly 2 dozen others were injured. And in the 60 years since the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, the church has been rebuilt and stained glass has been repaired, but there are still so many wounds that time still has not healed. Family and friends say decades later they are still holding on to their memories and grieving the loss of the four girls who were killed that day. Unbelievable. And you think about the mindset of America today. Is it really any different today now than it was 60 years ago, as we see, at least not politically, right? The political violence that continues to push these type of narratives, uh, they continue. So, are you are you ready for this? How many people are Swifties or dangerously in love with Beyonce? Well, an intriguing debate over specialized journalism in an ever evolving media landscape over Gannett's decision to seek reporters to cover music superstars Beyonce and Taylor Swift has ignited. America's largest newspaper chain has placed a help wanted ad for two distinctive job listings on its platform: a Taylor Swift reporter and a Beyonce Knowles Carter reporter. These, quote, appointed specialists will be integrated into USA Today and the Tennessean teams, Gannett's Nashville based publications, signaling an ambitious endeavor to bolster their coverage of the iconic figures in popular culture. The two biggest icons in pop culture right now, and we have to say, are Beyonce and Taylor Swift. According to Michael Anastasi, who is the editor of the Tennessean and Gannett's vice president for local news, the chain is actively seeking, quote, modern storytellers or individuals skilled in print, audio, and visual journalism. In a job description posted by the company, the Taylor Swift reporter will dissect her enduring influence, scrutinize her fan base's cultural significance, and evaluate her far reaching impact on music and business. I got to tell you, I had this discussion with my wife. I do not get the whole Taylor Swift thing. I see um, like my man Flavor Flav is a huge Swifty. And I mean, he travels, going to her concerts, collecting all her memorabilia, posting all these pictures with him and her at her shows. And he talked about this is he says it's not anything new. It's been forever. He's been a Swiftie. He says he identifies himself as a Swiftie. I don't get the whole Taylor Swift thing. Now, granted, I don't follow her. I don't follow her music that much. I mean, you hear it, but I just don't get it. But there are apparently enough people who do. And similarly, the Beyonce reporter will encapsulate the multifaceted effects of that icon on society and the industries she profoundly influences. The immense popularity of both of those artists is underscored by a recent survey by Question Pro, which estimated that this year's Taylor Swift concerts could result in about $4.6 billion in economic activity in North America alone. 4.6 billion. The same survey noted that Beyonce shows should reap roughly 4.5 billion in spending, or roughly the same levels generated by the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Wow. So Gannett underscored the proficiency of their existing music team, because critics have voiced reservations about this situation and the recent layoffs that at Gannett, which resulted in a 47% reduction in workforce over the past 3 years. The News Guild, the union, data indicates that the decline in staff numbers have been more precipitous at certain newspapers in the Gannett chain, plummeting by up to 90%. And yet, here's the rub. You're hiring these two people specifically to cover Beyonce and Taylor Swift, And the pay, folks, here's the rub, the pay. The ad says that they are willing to pay up to $100,000. $100,000. There are reporters that I know who are barely getting by. And it's unreal. Unreal. A lot of people are upset by this, not at the individuals who will get the job, but the state of newspapers, in particular, Gannett, laying off all these people. And one of their papers laid off 90% of his workforce, and yet you're gonna find 200 grand in the budget just to cover two music stars. That is incredible. They don't have a reporter dedicated to just the president, right? Whoever covers the president for those outlets also covers everything that goes on in the White House, and in a lot of cases, the uh, Congress as well. But you have a dedicated reporter for Beyonce, a dedicated reporter for Taylor Swift. And again, somebody, Power 96, maybe you can tell me what's the deal with Taylor Swift? What am I missing? What am I missing? I would like to know. Would like to know. But such is what it is. I know there's a lot of Beyonce fans out there. And that's the other part of it. Will they're so essentially they're looking for a fan, a true fan, a true Swiftie, a true Bayhive member. Um, but will they have the audience? I mean, meaning will other fans pay attention to this particular fan and what they are writing about? Because there's a billion blogs out there and everybody has a say. So, but help me out, somebody. Aunt Pam is watching. Help me out, Aunt Pam, on this Taylor Swift thing. I know Aunt Pam is like totally into the Bayhive. She's like Bayhive leader number 1A or 1B or 1, something like that. So I want to know. Power 96 says Taylor Swift dances like fish out of the water. He don't know, he said. Somebody tell me before I talk about Mitt Romney quitting. Mitt Romney saying that he is not down with this anymore. In fact, he was very adamant as to why he didn't hide why he was quitting. It was like reminiscent of John McCain. Um, we know Pam says, I love the Bayhive. She's like a leader of the Bayhive. But anyway, but Romney says that the party has gotten behind and has turned into individuals or a group that now follows a demagogue, obviously referring to the former president. Um, he says that it's time for younger ones to come in, and if he when you look up and down the landscape, I mean there are some young ones uh, out, George Santos. But he says it's time for a new generation of leaders, and most people agree with that sentiment. Time for a um, generation of new leaders or new generation of leaders. He's not going to seek another term in the Senate, so he's going home to Utah. He says he is just going to get out. He says he cannot back what they want him to back, what they want Republicans to back. It should be a loud and clear message. But as we know, and I'm sure Austin would jump in and say, yeah, it will not matter. Romney, we saw it with John McCain. Mitt Romney, Mike V says Mitt Romney was the last hope for the Republican Party. Now you have no rational thinkers in the party. Romney/Ryan in 2012 was supposed to move the party forward. Now they have nothing left. And that was the thing. He was their nominee for president in 2012. And he is saying, I mean, not that he's switching parties or affiliations or anything. He's just saying he can't support this anymore. He cannot support this. So there you have it. Mitt Romney exiting stage left. Well, folks, we had what did Austin say? He says, Austin, he says, God help the U.S. Senate and the House. There's no help for them. God's not interested in them. Not that crew. Folks, we had a great conversation with two very interesting and hilarious podcasters and journalists, now authors, as they release a new book today. Let's check out the conversation we had with them. Vernacular doesn't often get its due, despite its enormous influence on mainstream culture, but historically Black phrases is here to give Black language its flowers, a celebration of over 200 staples of Black conversation, from church sayings and units of measure to compliments and reprimands. This sharp and witty guide explores the unique importance of Black expression and communication. Now comes a fun and thoughtful dictionary of Black language you didn't know you needed, and what the authors call a love letter to the Black community and the ways it drives culture. The book, Historically Black Phrases, is written by Jarrett Hill and Tre'vell Anderson, and it's on sale right away, September 19th. So you might want to grab it. So join us now are the authors, Tre'vell Anderson and
Hello,
Jarrett
thanks for having
Hill.
us.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Good
us.
to
Yeah.
see you both. Absolutely. This is so interesting. When I saw this, I was like, okay, this is going to be fun. So, first and foremost, tell us more about the inspiration behind the book and what motivated you two to explore the unique importance of Black expression and communication.
So it started for me as doing these posts on Facebook where I was doing it as a joke. And I would explain what charge it to the game meant, or, all the different things that I found myself saying or found my family saying. And I would like define them in like a Facebook post. And I started doing it. And more, like someone asked after I had done it a number of times, someone asked me like, are you doing like a book or something? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's an interesting idea. And I spent years and years pitching it as various different kinds of things, wanting to figure out how we could have conversations about the ways that we speak and why we do the things that we do, and like trying to translate them and give you a way to use them. Because I also find in this work that like there are a lot of Black people who don't have exposure to certain parts of culture as we were doing study for this. So it really brought up a lot of different interesting parts of our culture and how we got here. And I really, really enjoyed that part of it.
Yes, really interesting. So, Tre'vell, Black vernacular has had a profound influence, of course, on mainstream culture. How do you see your book contributing to the recognition and appreciation of Black language
Yeah.
and its
Well, you
cultural
just said it, right? We don't
significance?
get our credit, right, linguistically or otherwise, for what we as Black folks have created and offered to culture. And I think our book is just trying to do that in a linguistic sense, right? Everyone wants to be us, they want to sound like us, they want to act like us, without necessarily knowing the meanings behind our phrases, where they come from, their importance. And I think for us, we wanted to do that in a fun way, right? Like, this isn't your, this isn't your deeply academic enterprise, okay? This is a book that we want y'all to have on your coffee table, that you can open up and have some fun with, words like casket sharp, right? What that means, how you have heard that. Maybe you haven't heard that, right? And it allows you to learn a little bit more of, for example, what we say in the South when we want to tell somebody they look good. So it really was an effort to kind of give us our flowers, but also do it in like a fun, approachable type of way.
So, with that in mind, can you both share some? Tre'vell just shared a tidbit there. Could you share some examples of the types of phrases and expressions that readers can expect to find in the book?
Absolutely. So Tre'vell just gave us Casket Sharp. We're doing an event here in Los Angeles on Tuesday, on September 19th, when the book comes out. And the Reparations Club has been doing messages back and forth with us as they were going through the book. And Casket Sharp was one of them. That comes from my grandfather. My grandfather, if you came in on Easter Sunday or whatever it was on a Sunday morning, he'd be, "Ooh, boy, you Casket Sharp." And I'd be like,
Yep.
"That's a little morbid, but okay," And so, like, that was one of them. Another that's from my family is "The Devil Is a Lie." I use an example in the book of my aunt where someone had come into her house and their child was jumping up and down on her white leather couch, and "Oh, the devil is a lie." Right. And so, like, discussing what it means when we say that, and knowing that that is a Black church phrase. There are all kinds of different things throughout the book. In the subtitle, we have from "I Ain't One of Your Little Friends" to "Who All Gonna Be There." We put that into the subtitle, wanting people to know, like, there's a bit of, like, flavor in this book. It's not going to be like, as Tre'vell said, it's not something that's going to be stuffy. It's going to be something that's fun, something that you can pick up and laugh with and recognize some of these phrases because you probably said them in the last day.
We were talking about that earlier. Our producer Greer and I, saying our grandparents certainly, and even our parents, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. What is that?
Exactly.
Y'all know what.
Listen, like, we have so many things. Like, my favorite in the book is something my grandmother used to say. Jarrett believes I am making this up, but I am not, and that is.
I still do to this day.
The phrase is "Used to the rooster don't crow no more." Have you ever heard that one?
Oh gosh.
You haven't ever heard that.
No, Jarrett, I think I've heard that one.
Don't just lie now. Don't just lie.
Listen, honestly, that sounds familiar. Black people come up with a little bit of everything, no matter what it is. It's like y'all came up with this book.
Absolutely. Tell people what "used to the rooster don't crow no more" means, though, because somebody don't know what that means. Most people don't know what that means.
It's just like, you can't teach that statement, you can't teach a dog old dog new tricks, right? It's related to that.
See, you already making it up.
It's related to that. It's that, things that we used to do, right? We just don't do no more. It's something you would say to an old head when you trying to say, you behind times and we need you to be present. You know what I mean? That's what it means.
So what else? Listen, what else did y'all fight about to get in this book?
Lots of things. So we should say that, Jarrett started this process as he described earlier in the conversation. And when he brought me onto the project, he had already had like 200 or some odd phrases that he had put together. And then, Jarrett's from the West Coast. Jarrett's from the Bay Area. If you can't tell that from my
now, wait a minute. Now,
if you can't tell from my speech, I'm from South Carolina. And so, the Blacks on the West Coast and the Blacks in the South, there are connections, but there are also so many differences in just different words, different ways we use words. There were phrases that I would use that those folks in the Bay Area use a different way, right? But it's the exact same word. So we actually, there was a lot of tussling over this word needed to be in here. Is that word actually historically Black, or did just Black people take it over? Like, those types of particulars. Oh, yeah.
Oh, so y'all went like that. You wanted to make sure that it was historically Black.
Well, so it was an interesting conversation because we were interested in the ways that Black people have historically used these things, right? Like, they can come from various different places, but Black folks always have a way of being able to put our own stank on it. And so, like, if it's something that Black folks have used throughout, this generation or two, we put it in there. And that was also something that we wanted to talk about, is like, this is not a book that is going to take you back to, 1850, 65, right? It's not going to take you back to jive turkey and like certain things that we're not using right now. We're talking about language.
1865.
Well, I was bringing it a little bit more present, right? But like,
yeah, you calling me old?
No. I'm saying from 1865 to jive turkey is what I mean. But like, the idea of like language that we're using right now, right? Things that we would be hearing in culture right now, that we would be saying, that our parents might be saying, our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, our cousins might be saying in this time. Like, what are we saying, and where does it come from? What does that mean? Or what exactly were you trying to convey there?
Yeah, it's a lot. Listen, it sounds like a lot of work went into this. That makes a great book. I mean, what you guys have put together is really just on the surface, it's really interesting. I don't know if you ever watched the show, the old show Gunsmoke, right? So I heard a phrase. I was watching it. My grandparents used to like that show. So I heard a phrase in that show that I later heard, maybe a few years ago, right? That I'd never heard before. But it's not a black saying. It's clearly a white saying. And so we're talking with these folks. My wife and I were talking to these folks, and I got to go retting up the house. And I was like, clearly, black people don't say that. Clearly. And it means that they haven't guessed, they got to go straighten the house up. And I heard that same expression on Gunsmoke. This just shows you how different the cultures really are when you look at the vernacular. Both of you guys have an impressive background in journalism and media. How did your professional experiences inform your approach to writing and
Well, I think a
researching
lot of
this
it
book?
started. Oh, you want to go first, Jarrett? Go ahead.
Go ahead. You got it. No, you got something good. I can already feel it. Go
I
ahead
was
on.
just going to say, I think our approach to journalism is one that isn't necessarily traditional in a lot of ways. And I think that lended to our process, by which I mean we recognize the importance of our own personal stories and our own personal journeys in the work that we do. And so that allowed us with this book to really allow, the words that you see in the book to grow from our own lived experiences, right? We're not trying to do something comprehensive. We're not trying to define Black language in totality, right? We really just wanted to recognize and uplift the types of phrases and the languages that we learned from our parents, that we learned from our grandparents, right? That we heard in the church house, or we heard on, Jarrett and I both went to HBCUs, that we heard on the yard, right? Like it's one of those things where I think when you ask the question of like our journalistic and our professional background, it really is recognizing the importance and the utility, right, of our lived experience and allowing that to inform the work that we do.
I see. Wait, Jarrett, before you answer, Jarrett, I see where Tre'vell is really making sure he keep the haters in their place. He's like, this is what it is. Don't come at us saying it's all Black stuff. Did you feel that,
let me
Jarrett?
just jump in real quick, Jarrett, real quick. I do want to just note, and I want to do it on the record, I do use they, them pronouns. But we did definitely want to start out and let people know this is who we're talking to, and this is who we're not talking to. Because, our people, they can get sensitive. But go ahead, Jarrett.
Right.
Well, I would say we've been thoughtful about the way, in the way that Tre'vell explained it, about the way that we approach this book, right? We wanted it to be something that would be fun and light, but also be able to have some substance, right? So we are talking with academics and linguists about the ways that we speak. One of the things that was really profound for me in this process was talking with a linguist who studies Black language, right? And hearing her talk about the ways that our language is language, right? We hear it often spoken about as broken language or mangled or all kinds of different things because of the different ways that we pronounce words and use turn a phrase, if you will. But having a conversation with an academic who studies this and talks about it, she was able to talk about the ways that it is important and it is a real language and it is worthy of study, and this is why. And in the different essays that we have, one is about code switch, and we talk about why we code switch and how it shows up and how it is unique for Black folks, but also is something that shows up in other pieces of culture and is not necessarily a switch, right? But a dialing of different dials. We have conversation about Black church and the ways in which, so much language comes out of Black church, things that we were explaining earlier, and the ways that comes into culture, in more broad popular culture outside of Black culture. And then as we were just discussing, like pronouns and different things like that, we're having conversations around the ways that a lot of language comes out of Black and queer culture, right? Queer and trans culture, and the ways that culture has such an impact in our Black culture and then in our larger popular culture. And so we have various different essays inside the book as well, to be able to have some conversation about the ways that we speak and the things that we've said, in the midst of having fun about the ways that we speak and the things that we're saying.
Yeah, and well, Tre'vell, just to go back, not harp on this part, but just to go back just a second, how challenging has it been, like you said, you they them, to really get people to go with that, to understand that this is what this is how you identify. How incredible. It
You
must be
know,
a
it
challenge.
definitely ain't easy. But one of the things I like
It
to
ain't
remind
easy.
people is that, they, them as a gender neutral pronoun is not new, right? We all do it already, right? When you just don't know, when you're talking to somebody back in the day before you said you were married. So before you were married and you were talking to somebody, you were dating somebody, but you didn't want your boys to know. And so you kept it general, right? It's that exact same thing, but applying it to me, this fabulous person. But I think that like it is representative of where we are in culture now. So many folks who use they them pronouns, everybody knows somebody in their life that perhaps if they them pronouns were used in more readily back in the day, you might use those pronouns for them, right? That person who exhibited gender non-conforming behavior that you just thought was, your uncle, or you just thought that was just your granddaddy, that's just what he did. But perhaps if he was living now, right, they might have been using they them pronouns. So it's been difficult, but I challenge everyone, and I know that everyone can get there. I believe in that, and I think it's one of the beauties, right, of us even doing this book around Black language, and like recognizing the differences in how this conversation, right, shows up in our communities versus other communities, and being able to kind of tap on it in a very specific way so that I can get my people to come along into this century.
Well,
Can I
but go ahead. Go ahead.
can I also say, as a cisgender person, it has been a bit of a journey as well for me, right? Because in these
Hmm.
instances, when I'm with Tre'vell, if we're out in the world, if we're at an awards night, or if we're working on our audiobook, or if we're out in the world, because we do quite a few things out in the world together, there are many instances where there will be misgendered, and like then it's a conversation between the two of us, right? We've had conversations before about how would you want me to respond in that moment, or how can I be supportive in that moment, and so as Tre'vell jumped in and corrected the pronoun, there's also the opportunity then for me, right? If Tre'vell didn't say something, for me to be able to say like, well, Tre'vell uses they them pronouns, and as they were saying, blah blah blah, and like we could just insert it into conversation as a way to be able to be helpful in that moment, so that it doesn't always have to be an awkward moment, because it can be a very awkward moment if you correct someone and then they make it a big moment and like they're awkward about it. And it's weird. It's like, oh, sorry, but we can always be helpful in that kind of way. And so it's been an interesting experience for the two of us to kind of go through this together as well.
Yeah, and as going back to the language, and the book, it's so interesting, because other folks, whether it be white folks, Latino folks, Asian folks, often, quite
Mm-hmm.
often, co-opt
Mm-hmm.
everything Black. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you address this, as far as with the language in the book, and because it is described as a sharp and witty guide, and I can see why.
I would say that this is a question that has come up since we first announced the book, of being like, well, so you're giving white people a way to
Give
understand
it
what
away
we're
to
talking
secrets,
about?
they
And it's
say.
like, white people have been doing that. Right, exactly. It's like white people have been doing that since we got here. We're like, what are you talking about? Anytime we do anything, white people can take it and co-opt it, and they often will. Right. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to document who we are and where we've come from and what we're doing and our contributions to culture. Like, people are going to do that regardless. We can see that happen instantaneously with TikTok. We can see it happen over long periods of time with the ways that we see race influence culture. Right. And so it's just an interesting thing to always kind of wrestle with, like, oh, do we put this out? Is this giving white people too much information? But it's like that secrecy, that way that we're holding things back all the time, it doesn't really serve us, right? Because being able to do this book, being able to have these conversations has really enlightened so much about who we are and how we get to this place, that it's been more valuable than it could ever be as a white knockoff,
I would
because
like to
it
give
will
a
come.
quick disclaimer for the white
How
people
many
though.
times?
Because
Sure.
let's be real. We
But
we we wrote
speaking
a
of white
book
people,
that will be available in bookstores nationwide, okay, across the globe at some point, right? And we want this book to be successful. Just looking at the overall population, okay, stay with me. The way that book becomes successful is a whole lot of nosy white folks wanting to buy this book, right, and engage with it. And so, what I say for the white folks who will want to engage with the work that we have created here is mind your P's and Q's, okay? If you go out into your local community and you start trying to use the language that you learned in
This is
historically
incredible.
Black phrases, okay? We are not responsible for what happens to you in response to that.
Well, I would say, like, because the piece of it is like white people can absolutely read the book, right? We hope that you read the book. We hope that you buy it. We hope that you gift it to people. It does not mean that you should then go take this language and use it out in the street, right? Like that's not exactly what we're saying here. And I've been stopped and
It's
asked by
gonna
white
happen.
people. It's going to happen.
Jared,
I
it's
mean,
gonna happen.
but it's always happened. Like it's not something new, right? Like they've been doing that since the beginning of time. And so when we think about how this gets engaged with white folks, I've been stopped and asked by like, so how do we use this, or how do I use this in class with my white students and different things like that? I'm like, there are plenty of different tools in which we have education on that we are not using, right? That we do not use or that are not for us to use. And this is one of those. You can have an understanding of how language works and how we got here and how and what we're discussing in this book without thinking that it's yours to be using, right? And so that's an important thing for white people to understand. And white people and everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Black language, if you will, it's so rich. Highlight some of the things that you guys have discussed, have put in this book that really further expounds on the
Yeah, I
richness
mean,
of the
I'll
Black
start and I'll
language.
say, Jarrett spoke earlier about the Black woman linguist that we interviewed. Her name is Dr. Ann H. Charity Hudley. She's a professor at Stanford University. And one of the things that I remember her saying to us that stuck out to me is about how the Black lexicon, if you will, is more than just the words that we use. It's also the it's the eyes, it's the sounds that we make, it's the things that we do with our hands. We as Black folks, I think the quote that she says is we have just a larger communicative landscape that we use in our articulation of what things mean to us and how that connects to the motherland, right? And the ways that we see various
Mhm.
ways of communicating pop up in a number of different tribes back in Africa. And I think that's something that, is often not talked about because they want us to believe that the ways we naturally communicate are unprofessional, not appropriate, that they are, uneducated. When the reality is we are just being that which we were called to be, and it is connected to our people. So I think about that
Mm.
in one particular case, and then I also think about how we have a quote from one of our good friends. She's a fabulous journalist and media personality from Chicago. And she says, there's this quote that she says, uh, Chicago people ain't nothing but Southern people with a coat on, right? And that idea, though
What?
funny and comedic, connects to the effects of the Great Migration, right? And how that manifests through our language. So you get, in the book, you get those kind of historical educational tidbits, but we wrap it in, a fabulous bow, so that it's super fun and engaging. And we hope that, you buy it and you have great, gab fest and kikis with your girlfriends and your spades group and everybody else in between.
You know what, Jared, and Tre'vell, perhaps you're aware or were aware that the Jamie
Mm-hmm.
Foxx situation recently, where another Black saying, it's this is as it's Black, it's a Black saying. They talked about Jesus Christ, is what he wrote, right? And all of a sudden, Jamie's anti-Semitic. Um, there was no ill intent. I'm pretty sure that Jamie, Jewish individuals, never came to mind when he made that statement. When that statement is made, it has been made, as many people said, in the Black church. It's been in Black community center, whatever. So talk about that, if you will, because there are so many statements that we make as Black people intended to be no harm
Mm-hmm.
to nobody outside of Black people, but yet you get what Jamie got.
So if I can like use my own personal example, as Tre'vell talked about, we used our own examples in some of these stories, and like one of my core memories as a person, I was like 11th grade, and I remember being upset with something that was happening at school, and some folks not liking me and not responding to me in the way that I wanted them to, and like I remember my dad so like flippantly saying, in a way that kind of pissed me off, if I'm kind of honest, but like he said to me like, Jarrett, people didn't like Jesus. What make you think everybody gonna like you? Right? And then like it was kind of like derivative of this idea of like they killed Jesus, they gonna come after you, right? Like there's nothing special about you. And I do remember him saying like, "What makes you so special?" And I was like, "Now wait a minute, now,
Right.
right?" And like, but it was a conversation that I've always remembered from being a kid, and like then hearing like, "Oh, they killed Jesus," or "They came after Jesus," or the different ways that we talk about the persecution of Jesus, and like they has never been something in any of the instances that I've heard it or discussed it or used it has never been indicative of a specific group of people, especially not Jewish folks, right? It has always been about opposition, right? Or like people coming after you for doing good. And so when the Jamie Foxx
Let
situation
it roll
happened,
off your shoulder.
exactly. When the Jamie Foxx situation happened, it was something that we discussed as like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we're talking about in the book, right? Historically Black phrases. And as we were talking about earlier, the ways in which we're contextualizing some of these phrases, there might be some things that you've heard outside of Black culture that came from somewhere else, but we're talking about the way that Black folks have been using it. Right, we're talking about the ways that Black folks have been engaged in this language and
I do want to
moving it
just
in
jump in
culture.
though, and I want to make sure, and I don't think we're
Mhm.
doing this, but for the sake of the airwaves and a full conversation, I want to,
Mhm.
articulate for everyone that's out there listening and watching, right? We're not minimizing this moment of intense anti-Semitism, right?
Not at
That
all.
that the community is experiencing. It is very real, right? And we're witnessing it day to day. However, okay, in this specific
Say
instance,
that again.
right,
However,
that was not the intention, that was not the meaning. And it
right.
goes to show, right, how the conversations that we're having in the barbershop, in the beauty salon, and in the church pew are sometimes very different, even though we're using the same words, right, as other cultures and other communities. And I do think it's important for us to recognize that, right? But that doesn't mean we should alter per se how we go about, articulating ourselves either.
And
Yeah.
then last
Well
thing on
said.
this, last point on this, we got a letter from someone. We discussed this on our show that also mentioned to us like we also don't want to erase that there are Black Jewish people, right? And so
Black
like as we
Jewish
talk
people who
about this
understand
from
the
the perspective
context
of
of that statement as well, to be clear.
absolutely, absolutely, it's an important distinction that we don't erase that there are people who live in that
Mhm.
intersection as well.
Yeah. And guys, and I keep saying guys, that's you say
I
they
I
them, but
I
guys is okay,
personally
right?
accept guys.
Because I don't want to be we talking about offending people. I certainly don't want to offend my
No, I
guests, and you
appreciate.
guys
I
are
know
great
your
guests.
intent is
So,
positive.
well, in today's world where discussions on cultural appropriation, we've been talking about this, and appreciation are prevalent, how do you think the book will contribute to a more nuanced understanding of Black culture and language?
I think that Black folks being able to read these things in a book that, first of all, I if I will toot my own horn, like it's really beautiful. Like it's a really beautifully designed book from inside and
Yeah,
out.
toot that, show that book, man.
I mean, I'm just saying, like
Yeah.
it's beautifully done. Like let me tell you, right? And so like as we just like give it all fingerprints all over it. But it's been so great to hear from people that are looking at it and saying like, oh wow, this is really nice. I've never seen something done like this before. I've never heard us discuss these things in this way before. And for Black folks to be able to have a bit of validation about who we are and how we show up in the world and feel a little bit more seen and maybe feel more empowered to speak in the way that they speak or to not need to code switch in the same kind of way when they show up at work or to be able to hear each other a little bit differently when they're in the conversation, or to be able to like laugh and have a good time, like, oh my gosh, I have not heard this since my auntie has said it back in such and such, or used to the who, what, don't do the what no more. Like, be able to like understand them and then be able to have fun with it. Like, there's so many different ways to engage this book, whether that be something serious, whether it be something academic, whether it's something fun. That's really what we're hoping will come out of it for the culture.
Well, we certainly, as Black folks, we certainly do, oftentimes, or at least sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
speak where nobody else can
Mm-hmm.
understand us except
Mm-hmm.
us. So there's no question about that. But the book's release is just like a moment away, really, right? What do you hope will ultimately that the readers, whoever reads it, and like you said earlier, I'm sure white folks gonna read it too. So, what do you hope the readers will take away from their experience with
I think for
historically Black
me, I'll
phrases?
say that, I think I really just want folks to know that the way you talk is legitimate, that it is valid, that it is professional, that it is, it can be academic, that it can be appropriate to be printed in the newspaper as it is, that it is what it is, and that is, that it just, because so often, right, we've said before that, like I've been told in particular that the specific way that I talk, isn't appropriate for the airwaves. It isn't appropriate for certain leadership positions. It isn't appropriate for certain jobs that I've had at various, news outlets. And why not? It's because we all have grown up in this world that have told us that the way we talk is wrong and that it's problematic. So hopefully by seeing our words, our language, in this beautifully designed text, it will make somebody else go, oh, it's in a book, like the same power that we have given to Merriam-Webster and the rest of them. Why can't we give it to our own folks? Give it to
There you
historically Black
go.
phrases. Go ahead and reference it. Why not?
There you, there you go. You guys both do a podcast. Tell us a little bit about the podcast before we let you go, and how has the experience in podcasting influenced your writing and the way you engage with your audience through this book?
Well, the podcast actually, like, we did an episode of the podcast talking about code switching, which really informed the idea that we needed to do an essay about it, right? And like have conversations around it and unpack it a little bit more. But also, like, all of our interviews, like, we recorded them very similarly to how we do the podcast, right? And it was something where we're able to spend 45 minutes to an hour with someone, being able to just kind of have conversation about this. But our podcast, it's really been a fun way to kind of like have conversations that we're having in the book, but also like being able to kind of test them out and get feedback and hear how people are responding to them. The pod, as we said earlier, is called Fanti. It is about the ways in which that we love certain things and we are against that. We have like some mixed feelings about certain aspects of them. As you use the word nuance, that's something that we recognize is really, really important. Oftentimes we are told that this is that or this is that, and it's this or it's that. But like so many times there's shades of gray in the middle where like, oh, but did you consider this piece of that conversation? Or, oh, but what about that angle of the piece of the conversation? Or did you know that they also did this? And so it adds another element of the conversation to be considered. And so that's something that we take really seriously over on Fanti.
Well, most importantly,
You can get the
where
book
can folks
wherever
get the
you
book?
get wonderful books, and it's also available where you get not wonderful books either. Whatever your choice and whatever your feelings.
Well, you got to show the book again now
Or you can go
people
to
understand it.
historicallyblackphrases.com and be able to pre-order the book there. I keep getting my handprints all over it. It's so pretty. Like, I've been really, really happy since it like showed up in the mail. I'm like, oh my God,
Who,
it
who,
looks so good.
who picked the color? Who
You
picked the
can't
cover, I
tell?
should say?
Oh, I mean, it's designed. I designed for those of you who aren't looking, like I designed the book around my house, right? Like
Yeah.
I always had this vision
Well,
for
it
it.
was kind of rhetorical. It was kind of rhetorical.
Well, it's an interesting thing. Tre'vell was like, I think you should lean in your direction about what this is. When it became something we did jointly, I said to them, like, I don't know what our book looks like, but I know what I had a vision for it to look like. And they were gracious in saying, like, no, I think you should lean into the vision that you had for this and like do that. And so it is something that I designed to be able to look great in my home, on my coffee table, and on your coffee table, and on your auntie's coffee table, and anyone else that you give it to.
Jarrett keeps saying it's so pretty. So it's like, after a while you say, gosh, this guy, he's a bit on the Jarrett's a bit on the conceited side. He probably looks in the mirror and goes,
As you
I'm so
should,
pretty.
friend.
No,
As
see
you
now,
should,
that's not
friend.
the
It's
same
okay.
thing.
You can be conceited.
Listen, I shaved yesterday, and I do feel myself a little bit today, but that don't tend to be the norm normally. But the design of the book was something really important to me, and I've been hearing that feedback from people in the last week or so, and it's been feeling good that people are like connecting with the design of it as well. I fashion myself as an artist who uses the channel of journalism, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes,
Tre'vell,
he does not like especially when people clock him on his aesthetic. We should know Jarrett is an interior designer as well. And so that's also where the design, and aesthetic, feelings come from. So it's what he does.
Okay, I got you. Well, the book, everybody, you got to get this book. Show it one more time, Jarrett. Show everybody.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Have you not? I don't know if you heard, but it's a beautiful book. It's a beautifully designed.
It's a beautiful book, folks. It's a beautiful book. Historically Black phrases. Tre'vell Anderson, Jarrett Hill. We certainly appreciate you guys. And check out their podcast.
Available everywhere.
Podcast?
Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, whichever one you use.
Type in Fanti, Fanti, wherever you get your podcast, historicallyblackphrases.com, to be able to get the book at a local place or at one of your retailers. So yeah.
Well, get the book, everybody, and thank you so much, Tre'vell and Jarrett, for joining the Black Press of America.
Absolutely.
Well, there you have it. I'm glad Mike V says he enjoys that, and others. I'm glad you enjoyed it. One quick note, just Whoopi Goldberg and The View returned yesterday, and Whoopi had a chain of the chair from the Montgomery. Everybody's into the chair. Thank you so much for joining the Black Press. Let it be known next week, next Friday, folks. Next Friday, a week from today, the NMPA big gala. It's the annual legislative conference. It's the reception and awards at the Marriott Marquis. There is still just a few tickets left. You better jump on nmpa-events.com to get your tickets to this spectacular event. Rough Ends is going to perform. Ben Crump, Stephen Horsford, and others among the award recipients. So check us out live next Friday evening at 7:30 Eastern time. Come in to the Marriott Marquis and join us. We will see you folks next week, but enjoy the weekend. Sign up for the 2023 NMPA National Leadership Awards reception. Like I said, there's only a few tickets left. They've been really flying off the shelves, or at least moving like hotcakes, or however black phrase you want to put in there. But check us out. They're live. Come join us. David Youngblood was down in Washington during Black Press Week. Like to see a lot more of you guys down there with us. So come on down. We'll see you then, and we will see you next week.